Hi, this podcast is all about the essential and intensely topical subject of hybrid working. Hybrid is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really reimagine the way we work. And if we can approach this with intention, we can really transform the effectiveness of our organisations and in the process improve the lives of our employees. My name's Garin and I've been an organisation development consultant for the past 16 years. Organisation development is the third of the HR disciplines, and it's all about working with organisations and treating all of its components as an entire system in order to achieve high performance. Dani and I are experts in working with organisations to overcome the challenges created by geography, time differences, and team and divisional boundaries as well. Dani and I have been working incredibly hard to identify, collate and curate the latest research overlaid with the real life experiences and challenges of organisations. And we've managed to put together a wealth of information into one short, sharp podcast accompanied by guides that you can use immediately. Dani, just want to introduce yourself.
Yes, so I'm Dani. I'm also an organisational development consultant, and I've led and worked with hybrid teams for the last 15 years. I've also been part of a senior leadership team that was operating with a hybrid model, so I've got plenty of first-hand experience of how it feels to be in a hybrid team and lead a hybrid team and how it works in practice, and also what can go wrong. So Garin and I started this Distinction podcast as we knew there was extensive research out there that could support leaders and organisations, but we also had a shared frustration that so much of it doesn't have a pathway into management and HR practice. So the podcast is all about bridging that gap. We've covered topics like leadership and remote teams, optimising team performance, decision making, and now we're looking at hybrid. So the name Distinction is a nod to the idea of academic excellence, to the things that make an organisation stand out, but also to helping leaders and HR professionals make that distinction between myth and facts when it comes to leadership practice. And there's lots of those flying around, particularly about hybrid.
Great. So in this particular podcast, we're going to cover 4 key areas. So the first area we're going to cover is we're actually going to sort of identify what are the building blocks of hybrid. So what are the ingredients, and they're not what you think they are. The second thing is how you actually design your hybrid solution. The third part is once you've actually made your decision is how do you actually manage a hybrid team, or if you're supporting managers, how can you equip them with the skills to do so? And then the last bit is how to actually grow your hybrid capability within your organization. We want to make it as easy as possible. So we put all of our thinking into 2 playbooks, and at different points in the podcast today, we're actually going to share the link with you. And if you're watching this on LinkedIn, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can actually see the link to the playbooks in the comments as well. But we really encourage you to download it. It's just packed full of tools, templates, and just great insights. So just before we get started, just in the comments, we just want to find out where you are. We're intensely curious because the research is emerging at the moment. We want to know how advanced are your return to workplace plans at the moment. Is it, you haven't even started thinking about it yet? Is it that some concepts have been discussed in your organization, but there's no aligned vision or plan? Or is it there's plans in place and they're communicated and you're either running pilots or you actually enacted your plan as well? So please feel free to leave them in the comments. We just really want to find out where you are on your journey.
So welcome to hybrid. So there's headlines every day about hybrid everywhere and every day, and they are a real mixed bag. There's daily updates as different companies are announcing their hybrid decisions. Either, you see everybody going back to the office or others deciding to go fully remote. And there's a fair few are opting for a kind of set number of days working from home each week as a sort of compromise. So last week, Asda announced that its headquarters staff could choose where they work, and they've called their approach work where it works. On Monday, the Bank of England announced it's going to be asking staff to work in the office 1 day a week. And that's in quite sharp contrast to a lot of the other banks who've taken a much more hardline approach and are insisting a full return to the office for everyone. And then there was Monday's announcement from the Prime Minister that all restrictions are going to be lifted from the 19th of July, including that requirement to work from home if you can. And I think it's fair to say the reaction to that is really mixed. So there's a lot of uncertainty. So what might our teams be thinking about hybrid? Well, there's lots of surveys out there that are giving us a sense of what our teams might be thinking, but they also paint a mixed picture. So we've just collated some of the stats here. You've got 57% of people worried about commuting time if they have to return to the office. You've got 54% worried about career progression in a hybrid world. You've got 30% saying they're likely to switch job if they can't work remotely. And you've got 13% who are worried about how they're going to look after a new pet if they have to go back to the office. But actually, work-life balance, flexibility and well-being top the list of both hopes and concerns about hybrid working. And that was in a poll that McKinsey ran very recently. So it's really far from a clear-cut decision. What happens next with workplaces is essentially just an experiment. There's no one right solution and nobody's got all the answers, and this is uncharted territory for lots of people. So whilst the pandemic's broadened the number of people who've been trying out remote or hybrid working, adopting it as a permanent way of operating in business as usual rather than kind of in the extremes of a pandemic is likely to feel very different. So deciding on best future working arrangements is complex. In part, it's that ultimate extension of the personalisation of the employee experience. For every individual desperate to continue working remotely, there's another person desperate and impatient to get back to the office. Not all people want the same solution or are going to be productive, happy or effective with the same solution. And equally, we know things like people don't need to be very far apart for communication to suffer. So there was some research done by Thomas Allen of MIT that showed that when engineers were moved just 25 meters apart, their communication dropped to almost nothing. We've got some more recent research by Microsoft earlier this year, and they found that the number of employees feeling connected fell from 91% in April 2020 to 71% by February of this year. So it's really no wonder why so many leaders are feeling unsure on how to move forward. More research by McKinsey found that 40% of employees have yet to hear any vision from their organisations about what post-COVID-19 working is going to look like, and a further 28% that say that what they have heard remains vague. So that, at the moment, is 68% of the working population who are unclear on how they're going to be working and carrying out their roles in the very near future. So that sense of limbo is going to slow down decision making, delivery, and ultimately affect organisational performance, as well as have a really significant impact on people's well-being. So although it's not clear cut, people generally feel things like savings on office space, improved flexibility and environmental impact are likely to be potential positives of hybrid working. Things like culture, collaboration, innovation, coordination of things that are cited as concerns. And then there's a whole host of things like work-life balance, productivity, talent management, inclusion, productivity, where people just aren't sure whether that's going to be an upside or a downside of hybrid, so that people are sitting on the fence. So the right answer, unfortunately, given our preference for simplicity, is it much more likely to be it depends. It depends on the organisation, it depends on strategy, it depends on the nature of the work, tasks being carried out, and it depends on the individuals who are all central to bringing that strategy to life. We'd really like to find out what you perceive as the biggest upsides and downsides of hybrid. So there's some ideas on the screen, and we'd love it if you can pop your, if you're listening on YouTube or LinkedIn, pop your thoughts in the comments. So now we're going to look at how you actually go about making the right hybrid decision for your organisation. Hybrid can work brilliantly, but it's not without its challenges. And the initial move to remote working for organisations was a rushed decision in the chaotic context of a pandemic. And actually, hybrid's different. It's a strategic decision. So we're hearing from lots of organisations that they're approaching their return to the workplace as a series of tasks to be completed. And in part, that's right, because the return to work is challenging and complex. Different teams are likely to come back at different times, so it's going to be a staggered process. It's going to be marked by uncertainty. And some of our teams are going to be returning to unfamiliar surroundings with masks, social distancing. They're going to be wondering if their co-workers are vaccinated. And potentially they're going to be working with colleagues they've not met yet that have been recruited over the last kind of 15, 16 months. So, but many organisations are delegating sorting out hybrid to their best logistics and office management people. And whilst that's a really important component, there's also a lot going on beneath the surface. And that's where the role of senior leadership comes in. So that role is all about making it a unifying experience for all of our people. So this is an opportunity to take stock and to retrofit what was missed in the rush to move to remote working. We can review what's worked well for ourselves and our teams. We can identify what's proved more challenging. And Garin and I are working with organisations on being really purposeful about hybrid, about designing, planning and executing an approach to hybrid as you would any other business critical decision. And most importantly, not sleepwalking into it or drifting into it. And equally not rushing into it just because that requirement to work from home, if you can, is being lifted on the 19th of July. There's really huge benefits in taking some time to work through the right solution for our organisations. Before we go any further, I think it's worth defining what hybrid is. So much of the hybrid discussion and the headlines simplify it into a simple choice about the number of days you're going to be working in the office and the number of days you're going to be working from home. Actually reducing it to such a binary choice really limits its scope and potential. So taken to its full conclusion, hybrid could offer any number of kind of combinations and possibilities. And Gartner, a global research and business insights company, suggests we take this as an opportunity to move from designing work around location to designing work around humans. So we put the individual as that stable pillar around which we design our working practices. So when we talk about hybrid, we look at 4 core building blocks of hybrid, and the trick is really to work out what's the best blend is going to support our teams and the work they do for our organisations. So first up is location, and this is one that most people focus on. This is about where people are working. That might be at home, it might be in the office, or it could be a much more mobile, nomadic way of working, and that could be centred around one home country, or it could involve kind of complete global freedom. Next up is working pattern. So are we looking at a fixed or scheduled hybrid working pattern? we're going to specify a number of days, or we're going to give people complete flexibility about the pattern they choose to adopt. And we can have the same role for every team or every individual, or we can have different approaches for different parts of our organizations. The third building block's time horizon. So are we looking at our hybrid patterns over a week, or are we a working month, or even a year? There's some remote companies that really only gather together once a year or twice a year and gather and use that as their connection time. And then lastly, the fourth block is the one that's most often overlooked, and that's about synchronicity. So that's the extent of synchronous versus asynchronous working that we're going to adopt. Asynchronous working, if you're not really familiar with that term, is when people work and communicate with each other, but not in real time. So people complete tasks and they respond within their own working hours, and those working hours could be really different to those of colleagues. So rather than communicating and meeting in real time, asynchronous working might take the form of written communications. It might be commenting and working together on a shared document, sharing voice or video messages, and using platforms like Slack to communicate and then reply when it works for you. So we're now going to look at the process for making hybrid decisions.
Yeah, so we're going to give you a very clear process for making your hybrid decision. And what we want to do is we want to help you ask the right question based on the right information that engages your people, that allows you to choose from the best options available, that allows you to apply the optimal decision-making process, encourages you to communicate your decision clearly and therefore increase buying, and also allows you to approve things continually ongoing basis, because the situation is very fluid and it's going to continue to change over the next few months as well. So the first thing we're going to look at is to prepare. So number one is how you actually frame your starting question is critical. The most common questions that organizations are asking and that we're hearing quite a lot is the question, how many days should employees be in the office versus working from home? So we're hearing, like, they're thinking, is it 4 and 1? Is it 3 and 2? We're sort of hearing of major organizations going, right, well, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in the office, Monday and Friday at home. And that's just causing chaos. It's being mandated. And what this does basically is this actually really creates a narrow focus for your question. And what it often means is that you get the least worst option for the combination of your employees, your managers, and your organization. So if you were to actually broaden that question and ask a better one, the questions that you could ask is, how do we best organize ourselves to deliver on our strategic priorities? Or what arrangements will allow our people to do their best work? And what happens is these broader questions actually open up possibilities. They're inviting your people to be creative. And this is really an opportunity to reimagine how we work, rather than just overlaying hybrid on top of the outdated processes and ways of working that, kind of sort of based in the 20th century. So while hybrid actually feels like new territory for many organizations, it's actually worth saying that it's not entirely new. Global organizations have been wrestling with this for years and actually working asynchronously in lots of different ways. We work with US and UK based organizations for a number of years, and the way in which they work often is that the UK office workers will do their work during the morning, and then when it gets to 1 o'clock and American Open starts to open up, they then start to collaborate. So rather than just relying on your intuition to make this decision, and in the last webinar, we talked about the role of intuition, and that intuition works best in stable environments. This is not a stable environment, so we can't necessarily trust the cues, and this is more of a data point or intuition. So what we want to say is data is our friend during this process, because this is a human decision. So we really need to collect the perspectives of our people, as well as the harder performance metrics as well. So we really encourage you to conduct your own research within your organization, and the ways in which you can collect that research is extensive. You can run surveys, you can run focus groups, you can run online discussions, you can run hackathons, you can run special meetings, you can run appreciative inquiry, you can even run pilots as well. However, what we do say is don't expect to get a uniform view back. Our people are complicated and motivation is complicated as well. So give you an example, General Motors actually, which employs 150,000 people, ran a survey, and I think their senior managers like, right, here we go. We're going to get an absolute answer back. And what they found is that they got such a disparate range of views that they couldn't actually come with one policy. So they just gave an instruction to their staff, which was to work appropriately. I think the other thing to remember when you're getting the data in is that not all data is equal. A lot of the research is based on what people say they will do rather than what they will do. So what happens is this kind of say information is not as reliable, and the picture is going to continue to emerge, and we're going to start getting a lot more data which is a lot more reliable because it's actually based on behavior. So keep an open mind, keep revisiting the data, keep asking your employees what they're looking for, and start to iterate around that. The next step is engage. And so you really need to be clear about how you're going to engage employees in the decision making process, and this can be a very simple own goal for organizations. So if the way in which we involve our employees in the organization really matters. So if we actually involve our teams in decisions, it's been shown to increase employee engagement and job satisfaction. If you involve employees in decisions and changes that affects them, it actually reduces uncertainty and makes people feel less vulnerable. So we're just going to just share this on the screen. It's and I'll talk you through it. It's basically a spectrum of decision making tool, and it just helps you to decide up front how you're actually going to involve people in it, and you can actually talk to people about what people's role will be. So we've got basically 5 areas on the spectrum. So the first one on the left hand side is mandate and inform, and that's where senior leadership decide in isolation, and there is quite a lot of that taking part right now. The next one is where we actually consult and decide. So senior leadership consult with the team, gather their views, but they actually reserve the right to make the final decision. The third one is manager led. So individual managers decide on the approach for their teams. So they're making local decisions. And the next one is co-creation. So people are actually invited to discuss and co-design the solution with their manager or with HR. And then the final one is the furthest one over, which is self-determined. So responsibilities actually devolve to the teams and they actually make their own decision. Now there's massive pros and cons for all of those areas. So if you're looking for a speedy decision, then it's got to be mandate and inform all day long. But that actually is a false economy in some respects. So yes, you make a very fast decision, but the buy-in of staff is much more reduced and people feel done to. Self-determined is a lot slower and it means you have a lot less control over the outcome, but it means that people are taking a lot more ownership. And one of the things about hybrid is it's about collective responsibility. It's not just senior leadership who are responsible for this working. Everybody is responsible for it. So if you do decide to let people decide for themselves, it's really important that you just don't abstain or dump your responsibility. Work alongside with them to actually help support them as they make a decision. Set the parameters, say what's in scope and what's out of scope. What are the things that these are non-negotiables, you have to be in the office for that. Coach people to make sure that they actually consider the impact of their plans on other teams. And also on cross-functionals as well. And also really encourage them to be really clear about the work that's going to be done at home and the work that's going to be done in the office. So we're really interested to get some data from you guys. So where on the decision-making spectrum is your approach to hybrid falling, or is it likely to fall? Is it going to be in mandate and inform? Is it consult and decide? Is it manager-led? Is it going to be co-creation, or is it going to be self-determined by employees? So please feel free to leave your comments or just drop us a line via LinkedIn. We're really keen to hear what your thoughts are and what your experience is going to be.
So now we're going to take a look at how you actually make the hybrid decision. In that rush to kind of simplify a complex problem, there's a real danger with hybrid that we don't innovate, that we don't consider what options we could come up with if we were less blinkered by the patterns and ways of working that we've become used to. So we recommend working your options up around our 4 building blocks of hybrid. Consider how you're going to get all of those 4 to interplay with each other. It's also worth noting that generating more options actually increases our chance of a successful outcome. There was a classic 20-year study carried out by Paul Nutt that found that 71% of organisation decisions are actually binary choices. So for hybrid, that might look like, do we do 2 days in the office or do we do 3? And in that study, they found that decisions with just 1 extra option lowered the failure rate from 50% to 30%. And things like automation, AI, augmented reality are really pushing the boundaries of what's possible with remote and hybrid work. So this could be an ideal opportunity to really explore what's possible before determining that a role can only be done on site or in an office. So how do we generate those options? Well, there's all sorts of ways you can generate options. There's lots of brainstorming techniques out there. We don't have time to go into those today. That could be another whole podcast, but we're really happy for you to contact us afterwards if you'd like some ideas. But the key is to open up your horizons. Don't leap in with an arbitrary allocation of roles that can be done at home, in the office, or in a hybrid environment. The importance is you look at the tasks and the activities and categorize accordingly. So the first step is to kind of map out the key tasks and activities that your teams are undertaking, or get them to do it with you. Which ones can only be done in real time and with people co-located. So we suggest plotting key tasks and activities on a matrix. So if you imagine there's 2 matrices, one will be 2 axes, one will be about the requirement for people to be in physical proximity to complete a task, and the other is about the need for people to work in real time. And then you plot the tasks into 4 boxes. so that any tasks that are essential on both scales, people will need to be co-located in real time. So that might involve something like working on a physical product or with a person in parallel on something. Any task that's essential on physical proximity, but not actually on people needing to be there on the same time. You could do that with staggered working time. So you're not restricting people to a 9 to 5 working window. They could work at different times, and that might be sequential work on a physical product. And then any of the kind of tasks that fall onto the left-hand side of your matrix, they're ideal for hybrid working. So the key is not to group too many tasks together. What we're trying to do here is we're aiming to isolate those tasks and activities that really require physical or real-time interaction, and then that frees you up to be flexible about how the rest of the work's done. It's also best done at a local level by the managers and the individuals closest to the work. So once you've mapped your tasks, you can then start to overlay employee preference for hybrid or co-location and look at their capability to work that way. Not every individual is going to want to work remotely or hybrid, or equally might not have the capability to work in that way. Then you can look at team preferences and capability. Have your team got the skills? If you're requiring to collaborate remotely, have they got the skills? If they haven't, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you just need to put some extra effort into helping them upskill and make that shift. And then lastly, look at organisation needs. So as you work through your future approach to hybrid working, one question that's likely to come up is the role of the office if you're going to retain one. So it's often seen as a binary choice for everybody in the office or everybody remote, but actually there's lots of options in between. You could use the office as a social or collaboration hub, a kind of social anchor for your people. You could use the office as a space in the way that we have done historically, just to complete individual work. It could be a space for learning. You could have a series of satellite offices or shared working spaces that people can drop into and out of as they need to. You can have the office as symbolic HQ. So I've seen it referred to like a football stadium. Many fans don't actually get to visit their home stadium, but they're still fans, and they have an affiliation to that kind of stadium as a symbol of their commitment to the team. And then you can have episodic gatherings, so just bringing people together a couple of times a year to get to know each other and spend time with each other. So weighing up your options. Once you've got some options for hybrid that could work for your organisation, the challenge is really to work out the solution. The best balance is all those competing needs that are at play. So it's likely that in most organisations, you're not going to have one single form of hybrid that works for every team or department. And actually, I think we'd say if you try and apply a blanket approach, you're probably going to have a suboptimal solution, and that's going to lead to problems for you. So establish some parameters to test your chosen approaches against. We've given you some categories to consider. You've got individual needs around working preferences, productivity, well-being, capability. You've got organizational needs, which might be things like customer experience or financial impact, talent attraction and retention, environmental impact. And then you've got team needs around kind of workflow and coordination, collaboration, connection, communication. So at this stage, it's really important to have robust discussions about the criteria you choose and the relative importance of weighting you're placing on those, because that will really help you work through what's important. If there's non-negotiables, then make those really clear and explain the rationale behind them. And at this stage, you need to also work through the possible implications of all the options you're considering, both the intended ones and the unintended ones, how they're going to impact on different teams, customers, stakeholders. And in the event that any of your parameters or requirements aren't met, then try and be creative rather than say, nope, hybrid's not going to work for us. Be creative and look for ways to mitigate issues and come up with alternatives. Once you've chosen your preferred solutions, then we recommend you use a few key questions to really test and challenge your final solution or solutions that you're planning to move ahead with. And when you do this, bring in different stakeholders to help with the exercise, so you're really seeing things from multiple perspectives. So the first group of questions we recommend are around strategy. So is the solution you're proposing aligned to your strategic priorities? Is it going to flex to the needs of different teams as your organization grows and changes? And does it support key links across the business? So that's key relationships, key processes. So look into that. The second set of questions are around people. So do your people have the capabilities and skills to make the solutions work? That's both managers and employees. It's about skills, but it's also about personality and attributes. Not everybody's going to thrive in a hybrid environment, so you need to work through that. Does everybody have a sense of agency and ownership about their part in making your hybrid solution work? Everybody needs to be involved if it's going to be a success. Does your solution support the well-being of your team? And is it fair and equitable? And then the last set of questions are around infrastructure. So if you've got the right technological infrastructure to support your solution, have you allocated sufficient budget to make it work? And do you have the KPIs in place to track how things are working out? So now we're going to look at once you've made the decision, how you go about communicating it, and over to Garin for that.
Yeah, this is such an essential part of it. And again, it's something that organizations can very easily overlook. The way you communicate your hybrid plans are essential. It doesn't, those wonderful things that Danny just shared with you, it doesn't matter about the quality of decision if it isn't accepted by your people. And it's very likely, because this is a complex problem we're trying to solve, is that it's unlikely to give everyone what they want. However thorough and widespread your involvement of the team has been in the process. So it's really important to work through with teams what the decisions actually mean for them, their job, their team, their organization, and make sure you spend time with them and do it properly. So let's just take you through some of the key things that need to be broken into your made into your communication. And this isn't just about like the town hall meeting that announces it. This is like on an ongoing basis as well. So the first thing is explain the rationale. So why have you made the decision that you've made? Explain what is the evidence that you've based it on as well. The next thing is to actually show procedural justice. This is critical in all decisions, whether it's hybrid or not. And it's to show your workings. Like, this is the process that we followed. These are the people that we consulted with. This is the advice that we followed. And this is the advice that we didn't follow. And these are the reasons why. This is the pros of the advice that we didn't follow. And these were the cons. And on balance, we've gone with it for this particular reason. So it's what it is. It's communicating to people that even if they don't agree with it, you're kind of following a process. And also, it's really important in the next part is to actually be really clear what the trade-offs are. Just treat your employees like adults. I think sometimes what happens is we're very prone to overselling the decisions that we sell. There will be trade-offs. In some respects, it will make lives of people more difficult. There will be some people that can't do hybrid working, and you've really got to explain this to people. So if you're really clear with the trade-offs up front, because people will find out what they are in due course, and they'll only be discussing those in places that you can't discuss it. So around the water cooler, in the chat box, when you're having a meeting, all that kind of stuff as well. If you're really explicit about it, then you can actually invite people to actually help you address those things. And that's far more constructive. The next thing is to actually sit down with them. And this takes time, but it's very worthwhile, is to actually sit down and help people understand the impact for them on a personal team level. That requires actually sitting down and look, this is what it's going to mean in terms of your priorities or your resources or the hours that you work, or how it might mean to actually work asynchronously with another office that's maybe overseas or something. But it's also really important to understand that it's a two-way process, because at the moment, this is an experiment, as we talked about. So they'll be then feeding in more information that you didn't have at the time of making a decision. And this can allow you to update your decision if there's a new project that would actually make this more difficult. The other thing to talk about as well is helping them understand their responsibilities. We mentioned this earlier about the importance of this being a collective responsibility. So, particularly if you've gone down the consult and then we decide, or the mandate, like, you've got to make sure that they've got a responsibility for making this work. So they've got to feedback, they've got to make sure that they play their part and don't just leave it to senior management to make it work. The next thing is about offering tools and support. And this is, again, an ongoing basis. As you start to really operationalize these things, then the challenges will really start to emerge. Things that you couldn't even thought about, or the ticking time bombs that have been just bobbling away during remote working period, will start to surface. So it's really important that you're offering support to people and moving blockages, providing resources, providing tools, templates, scripts, whatever it is to help them in that process. A really nice example is an organization that actually trained up 250 internal, love this, digital ninjas to help staff adapt and benefit from the new tools and technologies. Obviously, we know the Pareto principle applies with technology. We only ever use 20% of its capability. So what these big group would do is have conversations at local level and support staff to actually help using this new technology, because you've got furlough returners, or you've got people that maybe not as technically minded as others. The other thing, we're talking about the playbook we're providing for you, is to actually provide a tool to actually help managers have better conversations. There will be some managers that just take like a duck to water in terms of providing the support. There's other managers that may have been promoted because they're technically very good, but they're not natural people managers. They will need some scripting to help make these meetings work well. So we provided some really nice information in there about a checklist that managers can do to make sure they're having good one-to-ones with their people. So the last step is actually to iterate. As I said, this is an experiment. You've got to be really upfront with people. We're going to be test, experiment, and review with findings. So this is a really nice process to follow. So if you design it based on what you know at the time, You implement it, you build review, and that review is made from the harder metrics, so performance metrics or employee engagement, whatever it is, efficiencies. And then you also bring in evidence which is more qualitative, so anecdotal feedback. What are your managers hearing? How are staff actually hearing? Have an employee steering group, get that information coming back in. And then based on that new and evolving information, and probably very likely to be new government policy that's coming in and new guidelines, we then iterate and we modify, and we keep doing this because this is the new way of working. This is the new BAU. This is not going to change, and it's going to keep evolving over the next few months and even years as well.
Great, thank you. And we promised you 2 playbooks. So this is the first one, Designing for Hybrid Working, and we'll pop the link into the YouTube description so you'll be able to access that.
Okay, so we've made the decision. We're now going to shift gears and start to look at how you actually manage a hybrid team, or how you support managers that lead a hybrid team. And it's really important to recognize that we have to rethink the way in which we support the employee life cycle. So the way in which we recruit has to change. So we really have to ensure that the candidates we take on, our recruitment process actually really looks to find out what are the capabilities and attributes that are going to help them thrive in your particular hybrid way of working. So that's going to require some really good thinking there. The next thing is about the process of onboarding. So it's likely, or it's very likely, to actually take longer for people to get up to speed, particularly people that are actually blending remote work as well. So it's really important to be clear on your expectations them up front, and vice versa. To, it's that psychological contract. Take the time to introduce them to their stakeholders, because they won't know the terrain. So as a manager, you've got to help them find out who they need to meet, open doors, facilitate, oversee, guide. You build good relationships with the managers of the people they're working with, and that will really help things as well. I think the other thing is about the way in which we learn and develop. Just because we're moving away from a traditional face-to-face learning model, which we've had for years, it doesn't mean that learning and development has to stop. We just have to find new ways. The L&D functions have really updated it, and what we're going to do is we're going to give you a link to a CIPD conversation we had with CIPD Central London, which has got loads of information about learning, development, evolution. But it's really important to make sure that you support them. So make sure you have mentoring relationships, make sure that you develop and encourage like communities of practice, so people that are doing similar roles can come together and discuss how they're working and share best practice in that way as well. The next thing, and Danny will go into a bit more detail later about this, is about progression and performance. It's really important to make sure that all progression opportunities that are available are fair and given, and people have the opportunity to progress regardless of their working situation. It's not just people that are basically close to hand for the manager. So have regular check-ins and look at things like productivity and well-being. Those kind of conversations take on even more importance as well. Finally, offboarding is probably something that we do overlook as organizations anyway, but if you get it right, it can make a huge difference. A good offboarding process has got a lot of benefits, including employee referral, rehiring, word of mouth. It improves your employer brand. But often organizations just kind of, people just leaving at the moment. There's importance of ritual as well. So what it does is be creative and find ways to help people leave well, and give opportunities for colleagues to say goodbye to teams, and allow teams to process that change. So it's really important to say that managers are the critical component in a hybrid world. They really are the connecting tissue between individuals and their teams, between departments and divisions, and between office and remote locations as well. McKinsey, really interesting research, found that organizations with the biggest productivity increases during the pandemic were the ones that had trained their managers in remote leadership. So this is really important that we support our managers in this. So managing a hybrid team actually requires a more sophisticated and nuanced leadership style, as you juggle all the complexities of managing people in different locations. And what's really quite good about this is that the things that we're going to actually promote you to do are actually relatively simple, but incredibly impactful. So what we're promoting here are just four skills. There's other skills which are hygiene factors, but these are the four critical skills. So number one is set your team up for success. So it's first principles. Two is build trust. Three is create collaboration and cohesion. Four is be fair and act fairly. So the first thing is to set your team up for success. So as Danny mentioned, in the rush to move to remote working last year, many teams ended up with multiple communication and technology platforms and channels. And that's really led to a lack of clarity around how they should be used or managed. And with many people also returning from furlough, many people haven't been trained and are only using a small percentage of their capability. And all of this leads to a confusing situation, making communication messy and complicated, and slows down decision making. So what we'd advise you to do is to actually conduct a communications audit. So it sounds like a grand title, but what it is basically is you just go through it, ask the questions that you find actually a copy of the communications audit in your checklist. The questions are, are we sharing the same messages via multiple communication channels? Is everyone clear on what needs to be communicated via which channels or platforms? What do we use Slack for? What do we use WhatsApp for? What do we use the intranet for? Just having real clarity around that as well. And also things like, are people clear about what the expected response times are for different communication channels as well? So once you've actually completed that, then sit down with your team, consult with them, share your findings, and then start to streamline the tools that you use and actually provide clarity on which channels. And that's a fundamental first step before you go into hybrid. The next one is to actually agree team norms for hybrid working. So managing a hybrid team brings lots of benefits, but it also brings lots of complexity. So it's really important that you sit down with your team and spend time agreeing the norms for how they're going to work together in this new hybrid arrangement. You've got some great experience of what's actually been successful over the last 15 months. We've also found what's been challenging as well. So use all these lessons learned and codify how you're going to work together moving forward, and make an agreement that's really explicit as well. And in the process, give people the opportunity to share and explore their concerns. And as you start to surface people's perspectives of what they would like, use a combination of one-to-one meetings and team meetings, group discussions, so that everyone can come up with norms that people can agree with. And so some of the critical questions that you might want to ask is, how will we signal when we're available and when we're not? What do we need to consider to help people maintain and improve their well-being? When will we work individually or asynchronously? What elements require virtual collaboration and what requires face-to-face collaboration? And what do we do when conflict emerges or we've got sensitive or complex issues that we're trying to work through? The other bit is hybrid meetings. Now, this is a little bit meetings 101, but a lot of the experts out there are just saying we just need to have less meetings. We need to have less meetings. We actually going to be contrarian to that. We actually believe it's not about the number, it's the quality of the meetings. If you're having better meetings, you'll just need less meetings anyway. So just some very good meeting disciplines can make all of the difference. So the first one we'd say is about the preparation for the meeting. Ask yourself the questions as you're thinking about your meeting structure. Is the meeting essential to the running of the team? Does the meeting have a clear goal? Is the meeting the only way to achieve that goal? Have the right people been invited, the people that are going to be impacted or the people that have got knowledge to contribute? And is that meeting at the optimal time for the people that have got different working patterns? Before people actually attend, have you been really clear of what your expectations are of them? We're still seeing agendas that go out that just say point 4, finance, point 4, risk. We don't actually ask and prepare people for what they're actually going to contribute in that session. And then finally, again, have agendas and papers been prepared in advance so people can actually walk into the room and know what's required of them. The next bit is actually just in the meetings itself, so the running of the meeting. So because, and Danny will pick this up in a second, which is about the importance of social interaction. Meetings are just such an important point for that. So always check in at the beginning to see how people are and just get to share. That's really important. Agree team rules. How are you going to use cameras? I'm still talking to managers that are just like, I'm the only person in my team meeting that has a camera and it's a bit awkward. Have a conversation about it, get clarity. Obviously people have got different working circumstances, but have the conversation and get clarity. And also make sure that you have lots of appropriate breaks, because online meetings and remote meetings are quite intense. Be creative. Again, loads of really good technology, Miro, Mentimeter, engage people and make it interactive. And for when you've got that kind of hybrid meeting, you've got people in the office and people dialing in, make sure someone in the room is advocating for those joining remotely to make sure that they are involved. Sometimes the chair of the meeting can forget that there's people dialing in remotely and the conversation just becomes in the room. So make sure that someone in there is inviting in the voice of the remote workers. And also, just clarify how people can ask questions. People with a preference for extroversion will just often just ask a question. People with a preference for introversion will often need to think about it before giving their opinion. So how do they make sure that they're heard and they're invited into the conversation? And also ban in-room side conversations. So, those kind of ones where there's a running joke going and everyone at home is like, what on earth is this about? And they feel left out. And then finally, just the other bit, which is after the meeting, again, just good discipline is when you wrap up, ensure the actions are recorded and shared. You know, everyone's got a very different experience of that meeting. By having that, everyone could agree and sign off on them. And then also, this is an emergent process. At the end of every sort of significant meeting, take 5 or 7 minutes at the end and get people to review how the meeting went, what went well, and what could be improved the next time. And that will make all the difference to the performance of your meetings. We'd really like to understand your experience of remote meetings. So again, we're going to invite you in the chat and the comments on LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever you're consuming this. Is it that your experience of remote meetings has been completely dysfunctional over the last 15 months? Has it been that it's been okay, but there's been room for improvement? Or is it that it's actually your meetings have been brilliant? How could you imagine them being better? So again, please leave your thoughts in the comments.
Great, thank you. So we're going to look at that second important leadership skill now. That's around building trust. So we know from our research that building trust is a critical factor for high-performing teams, and it's even more important and critical for remote and hybrid teams. So that trust-based relationship with your team means people are more likely to open up about concerns about their work, their productivity, or their well-being, and that means you're better positioned to provide support early on. You know, trust facilitates cooperation and effective coordination, so they're really critical for hybrid working. And trust is especially important when people feel vulnerable or there's uncertainty, and you know, it's going to help you navigate change and challenges more effectively. And hybrid working is likely to bring some of those challenges. Even if you've got a trust-based relationship with your team, then they're much more likely to give you and each other the benefit of the doubt when things don't quite go to plan as you're getting used to a new way of working. So what are those most important factors for building trust? Well, first up, it's about seeing and treating people as individuals. Have regular one-to-ones with each of your team members. Use this to check on how work's going, but take time to talk about wider issues so your team know that you care and understand what they're going through and where they are. But don't be intrusive. There's a fine line, and you'll need to work out that balance with each individual. So get to know your people and take it one step at a time. In the hybrid team playbook that we'll share the link to later, we've got a one-to-one conversation guide to help you, give you a set of questions to kickstart your one-to-one conversations to help you have great conversations. So the second really important thing for building trust is communication. So if you want to build trust, you need to communicate in a timely and transparent and respectful way, especially when lots of change is happening. And research shows that if you have a predictable cadence of communication, then that can really help build productive and trusting relationships. It's important that you make time and you're visible and accessible to your team, and that you provide practical support when people need it and show compassion.
Yeah, and I think the compassion thing is really important. I think we've been trying to sort of train managers to be empathic, and be more emotionally aware. But I think this is a time for compassion. And the difference between empathy and compassion is empathy, oh, I understand what you've been going through. Compassion is yes, that, and here's how I'm going to help or ease your conditions. And the compassionate manager is the person that can do that. And I think particularly during that transition phase, this is going to be quite a controversial comment because organizations have got used to sort of setting real stretch targets to this. There's something about, is there an opportunity to just reduce people's goals during this transition time? We all know the famous change curve with the dip in productivity. If we allow that, then that transition will happen much more naturally and will reduce the amount of stress that people are going through. People are going to be going into work, they're going to be traveling on public transport. It doesn't matter how well you set up your office, people are going to be having a pretty uncomfortable experience on the way in for a variety of reasons. Compassion can really help that. And the number one thing is, can you ease their conditions for them?
So important. So it's also important to really recognise employee contributions. So make sure people feel appreciated and visible wherever they're working. So don't forget people at home or working remotely. And when it comes to that, and share achievements. This helps people understand what each other are working on and really creates that sense of pride in the whole team if people know what the team's achieving, even if they're not co-located. The third block of effective hybrid leadership is around creating collaboration and cohesion. So social connections and cohesion are really crucial for high-performing hybrid teams. We know from the research that socially cohesive teams are much more likely to cooperate and interact with each other. And employees who were satisfied with the social connections in their teams were twice as likely to maintain productivity on collaborative tasks while working remotely. So social cohesion essentially emerges in teams where members like to work together, and even small amounts of high quality social interaction can really lower stress and improve well-being. And working virtually or in a hybrid team doesn't necessarily mean that social cohesion has to suffer. And equally, it doesn't mean forced or scheduled fun. So we know that, at the start of the pandemic, lots of teams tried to schedule virtual coffee mornings to create that cohesion. That worked for some, but not for others. And the trick is to really know what makes your team tick. try a variety of things and cater to different interests and personality types. As the manager of a hybrid team, you've got a really key role in creating collaboration and social cohesion. You've got a role as a broker, essentially. Your role is to bridge communication gaps that appear, be proactive and ensure that the right relationships are happening between individuals and teams, that you're connecting people with the relevant skills and experience and perspectives together, making sure they're working together, and ensuring that your team's got voice and visibility with senior leaders and decision makers. So that brings us on to the interesting point about more collaboration and innovation, really. So, despite high profile leaders like Tim Cook of Apple talking about the importance of serendipitous meetings, the research doesn't actually necessarily support this. So, Harvard Business School have done some research that says while there's credibility in the argument that people are more likely to have conversations if they bump into someone in an office, there's almost no data whatsoever to suggest that those conversations are likely to be helpful to innovation or creativity. So there's lots you can do to encourage innovation and collaboration, and it's innovation by design rather than chance. Do you really want to risk and leave innovation to the chance of somebody bumping into somebody in a corridor? So, one simple but powerful technique you can use to support cohesion and collaboration and innovation is really to sit down with your team and map out who needs to interact with whom to achieve your strategic priorities and work tasks over coming weeks and months. And you could use sophisticated organizational network analysis tools. There's lots out there, but a much simpler version that you can do very easily is just ask individuals to mind map their key relationships, get them to kind of score the importance and quality of those relationships out of 10, and then look at where the gaps are, where are the lowest scores, and what can you do as a manager to work with your team members to strengthen those important relationships. If you want to improve collaboration and innovation, then build your virtual collaboration toolkit. We talked before about making sure people know what tools are out there to help them collaborate virtually and they know how to use them. Experiment to see what works best for different tasks. Flex your approaches to suit different individuals. Different people work and collaborate differently. Share successes and recognize when innovation's happening. Be transparent and share good practice. If you've got some people having some really effective virtual collaboration, then let other people know how they're doing it and what's making that work, and create dedicated innovation time. So have hackathons or innovation days. Just make time and space for people to innovate rather than hoping it happens by chance. Now we're on to our fourth block of hybrid leadership, and that's being fair and acting fairly. So as careful as we've been with our hybrid planning, there's always the risk of unintended consequences, and that's going to be ever present. Consistency and fairness really underpin organisational trust, and inclusivity needs to sit at the centre of our hybrid plans. So there's lots of things to watch out for, and we talk about this in more detail in the playbook, but there's 3 things I just want to focus on now. And the first one's presenteeism. So watch out for signs that people are starting to feel they need to come into the office to be on a level playing field. If you've got leaders saying one thing, that we're going hybrid, working from home is fine, it's just as legitimate as being in the office, but then they're acting differently, you can actually create a culture of presenteeism and implicitly encourage people back into the office. And if you've said that hybrid's fine and people can work remotely, then that's just going to lead up to a build-up of resentment. You also need leaders that are role modeling hybrid. So what you don't want is a situation where the leaders are always in the office. They never dial into meetings. They're never working in a hybrid way. You need your leaders to really lead the way and show what true hybrid working looks like. Allied to this is kind of power dynamics. As you kind of adapt to new ways of working, that's going to shift organizational dynamics, team dynamics, power dynamics. So be on the lookout for imbalances and work out how you can redress them. Does everybody have equal access to knowledge, information, and decision making? Are individuals and teams being recognized consistently for the work they're doing, and you're not inadvertently attributing success to the wrong people or the wrong teams just by virtue of where they're happening to be? So lastly, track the long-term implications of hybrid on things like promotions and progression. So irrespective of whether your organisation is still running with a formal performance appraisal process, as a manager, you're going to be making judgments about the performance of your team. And as managers, we just need to make sure we don't fall prey to bias and start rating people working in the office more positively than those who are working remotely simply because we see them more. One study in a contact centre found that remote workers were actually more productive, but also less likely to be promoted than their on-site peers. And there was no ONS data that showed that people who work from home were on average 38% less likely to have received a bonus compared to those who've never worked from home. If that sort of thing carries on unchecked, then people are going to feel they need to be in the office in order to be treated fairly, even if their performance would be enhanced by hybrid working. So that can quickly disrupt your hybrid plans.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dani. So let's summarize what we've covered today. What we're going to do is we're going to just boil everything down into just 2 things that you need to remember. So that it's basically remember 5 steps and 4 skills. So the first one is how to make a hybrid decision. So there's 5 steps. So it's number 1, prepare, 2, engage, 3, decide, 4, communicate, 5, iterate. And the 4 skills you need to lead a hybrid team effectively are: set up your team for success, build trust, create collaboration and cohesion, and be fair and act fairly as well. So on top of all the tools and insights we've shared with you on the podcast today, what are some of the specific activities that you can do that will make the biggest difference? So these are some of the ways in which we're supporting organizations transition into hybrid at the moment, and we'll just take you through. And these are things that you could potentially do yourself. So number one is to actually coach the people making the decision. Make sure that they're actually bringing different options to consider, that they gather the right evidence. You can provide the tools that we provide in the playbook today, and again, we'll give you the link to both of those playbooks in a second. You can actually help in the support and setting up of the change teams that we're actually overseeing it. So if it's you're feeling that the team is exclusively logistical people and it's missing some senior leadership strategic perspective, then obviously that you can influence that. And also about facilitating the employees sessions to collect their views. There's a real skill in making sure that people feel heard, they're consulted to, they understand how their information is going to be used as well. The second bit is preparing your people and the processes for the transition. So that's actually providing some leadership coaching or team training to accelerate that transition. They're going to need some new skills for this. The other one is actually just giving them lunch and learn impactful sessions where that you just taking them through and you're going to equip them with the skills to help them work through it. The other one is actually training your internal hybrid champions to drive transition. The other one is actually support with setting KPIs to assess the impact of hybrid. It's very likely that many senior teams will be leaning towards hard metrics like performance and that as well. There's also the role of qualitative data as well. And then the third bit is actually embedding hybrid working. So actually supporting teams and maybe using some of the input we've used about how you can maximize the effectiveness of hybrid team meetings. Also, you can play a role in breaking down barriers between teams and divisions. People are very siloed going into this. They're even more siloed coming out of it. There's a role to be played. And also, this is really important, is equipping your managers to identify and act on the early warning signs. We all know when things are just not starting to work, or maybe people's engagement is going down, or you feel people are just not connecting or involved. And then the other thing is also making sure we sit down with everyone and make sure they understand what their responsibility is in making hybrid work, and helping them hold themselves accountable for that as well.
Great, thanks, Garin. So we promised you 2 playbooks. This is the second one, so how to manage a hybrid team. And again, we'll drop the link for that into the comments underneath the YouTube video or on LinkedIn. Just as a reminder, if you're watching this on YouTube, there's the links to both of the playbooks.
Great. The other thing to remember, this is a key decision. Like, it's probably one of the biggest decisions your organization is going to make this year. So it's important we're really aware of what our decision-making strengths and weaknesses are. So what we've actually designed, and again, the link to this is in the comments, and it takes around about 3.5 minutes to complete, and it's completely free. It's just a benchmark survey, so you can actually benchmark your decision-making skills. And what you get back is you get a report, your result, and some strategies and tactics to improve your decision-making skills.
Right, thank you, Garin. So we'd love to keep on sharing our best thinking with you. So hybrid is a really big subject. It's not a one-off thing. It's going to, there'll need to be ongoing discussions about this.
It's not going away.
It's not going away for a while to come. So, we're more than happy for you to connect with either of us on LinkedIn or connect to us via email, and we're happy to have conversations. And if you want to sign up for our ongoing regular tips, tools, and templates, then you can go to our website distinction.live and keep in touch and find us there.
Absolutely. And we're very active on LinkedIn. So we really want to encourage a discussion. This is really one of those times when it's peer support. We're all going to be having our own experiences of implementing hybrid. So the more we can build up a body of knowledge in terms of everyone's like, this is what I'm finding. So please feel free to keep contributing to the discussion, contributing your experiences, whatever they are. Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our podcast today. We're actually busy preparing for our next podcast, which is all about well-being, and we're really looking forward to sharing all the findings with you. Thanks a lot.